itself. As you guys have learned over the years, that our podcast was based on one principle and one principle alone: constant conflict, glitches, and confusion. We established from the get-go we didn't want a professional podcast. Why? Everybody does that. Too obvious. We wanted things to go wrong. We wanted you, and that's why I felt like there's no other way to approach this, but to realize that to get me to take my time on the Mondays, you're going to have to. And that's why I felt that I had broken new ground and that I had opened up your eyes to see things you'd never seen before. To keep up with that tradition, this podcast, this Monday night, is going to be different than all the other ones. This one's going to be a special podcast, unique podcast that might become a monthly podcast. Today, tonight, this podcast isn't going to be about you. Not going to talk to you. Not going to tell you how great you are. Not going to tell Nick that he was first. St. Nick knows Artie's first. Not going to tell Carlin how great she is, or Benjamin how much I appreciate his help. Not going to talk about all these wonderful people who come on every Monday. No, instead, this is going to be a special episode about gratefulness. I might do it once a month. I think it's the single most underrated and under-committed to concept in human existence. Without gratefulness, you have nothing. Without gratefulness, you don't know who you are, why you're here, and more importantly, you're not thankful for those who went before you and paved the way. So, that being said, we're going to try something new. You might hate it. You might leave halfway through. I had to try. That's what makes me the way I am. Pushing the envelope and praying it pans out. So, I give you the first unique episode. Monologue only. Seeking an actual thematic idea that's more important than maybe anything that I've talked to in a long time. Being grateful for what you have. Me? I'm grateful that this podcast is starting out perfectly. My audio is exactly the way it should be. Crisp, robust. So, that's why I love them. Folks, welcome to Brad Stine Has Issues. This will change your life. It sounds a little bit, like this. This is God's Comic, Brad Stine. This is Brad Stine Has Issues, where comedy, conservatism, and Christianity collide in a cacophony of clarity. Wyatt, do you think I could have been any more clear in the things I was trying to establish when I opened that? It's a cold open, by the way. Nobody else does that. I do. I'm a cold open guy. You know that. What do you think has made me so great at cold opening, son? Okay, he's faking that he can't. And what he doesn't understand.
I can't have fun with this too. It's only was still for you.
Do you understand what happened? As I was pretending like that, he got upset because he started panicking. Like, why can't I hear him? What's going on?
Actually, no. What happened was I knew what you were doing, and so I just went to the mixing board and started muting and deafing you on the thing.
Oh, nice!
To add to the realism.
So you actually added it and shoved it in there.
Yes.
Well,
Now the audience knows without a shadow of a doubt just how professional we are at this.
Listen, so it's a full, they're getting the full experience. This is the professional experience. Well, listen, yeah, I was joking around and acted like you couldn't hear me because, again, I don't want, here's the problem. Wyatt's getting better at this every week, and eventually there's not going to be glitches. What are you going to do when this is glitch-free? Where are you going to go when your life is miserable and you just got fired and you got diarrhea and you're driving and your car's got a flat and your girlfriend left you and you don't know where to turn and life is going misery, but you always knew, at least I can watch Brad Stine Has Issues because I know that's going to be worse than me. It's going to be worse in my life. Suddenly we're going to nail everything. Wyatt, is it possible that you can just stay incompetent just to keep people in the loop and help them to embrace the thing that brought them here in the first place?
Well, the thing about that is, I could stay in my lane and keep being the incompetent button pusher who you never see.
Or lack of button pushing.
But if you think about it,
Yeah.
the entire purpose of me being here is to cause issues. If I were to suddenly stop causing issues, well, that's the mother of all issues. So the only way for me to stay in character is to keep messing up.
Now, are you telling me that all the mess-ups we've had all this time was intentional, that you really are a thorough professional, high-tech expert, and that had you wanted to go that direction, you would have kept things spotless?
Oh, man, I get calls all the time.
Really?
Everyone's like, hey, can you run my podcast? We need a button pusher. Or, hey, we need you to not be in camera and just be a ghostly voice that just says stuff sometimes that's funny.
Well, that was our idea.
Yeah.
And it's worked. It paid off.
I mean, yeah, it's a sweet gig if you can get it.
Listen, we are drawing tens of people here every Monday, son. And a lot of it's because of you. Your incompetence and your sidekickiness.
Yep.
You do have some sidekickiness that a lot of people don't. You know that, no? Karen Boyd wants to be a sidekick. You know that. Karen has lobbied. She's texted me at the middle of the night, is there any way you can dump Wyatt? Any way you can get rid of Wyatt and let me come in? And I said, yes. Yes. And then I realized, how am I going to break it to her?
Well, I mean, you could have a special, never-before-seen hour-long podcast of nothing but monologues that just ends, and by the way, you're fired.
Hey.
I mean, that'd be what I do, you know? Like, keep them guessing. Because, like, if you're gonna let them down, you either let them down easy, or you go above and beyond.
Just ruthless.
Just unequivocally, this will be remembered in the history books.
Okay.
Go big or go home.
Right.
And we're already home.
Listen, if I fired you, would you cry?
Not on camera.
Okay.
Unless, of course, the audience would want that, in which case, send in those donations and we'll see what I can get.
Now I can't fire you because you're too good at this. I need you because you understand how important it is for our chemistry. And our chemistry is like, to me, our chemistry is like Diet Coke and Mentos. I'm the Mentos.
Okay, so you're small, round, and minty.
Have you ever smelled me?
So anyway...
Yes. Awkward. Awkward silence. You made it even worse, son.
Oh, hold on.
You brought up the minty one.
Don't worry, I have a button for this,
Oh, please. Oh.
Yeah. If it's gonna be an awkward silence, it may as well be the cartoonishly awkward silence.
For sure. Well, listen, did you listen to my little opening segment when I pretended like I could, that you were messing up? You did hear it, though, didn't you? Or do you normally check out? Is that why you brought a hammock?
No, well, actually, no. The hammock is for the part in the monologue where you just sort of go on a tirade and I'm just sitting back here pretending to be useful.
You telling me that you don't dig my tirades?
I dig your tirades. They are the perfect lullaby.
Okay, that was good. That was a zinger. I'm going to say that's a zinger, folks. And who am I to judge? I'm a professional stand-up comic, 30 years and plus. So I should know a zinger when I hear one.
Anyway, so what I was doing the monologue, though, was probably just as bad.
Oh?
So I got a friend whose birthday is coming up, and I've really been struggling to get them a gift.
Really?
So I looked on Amazon for some ideas, and I found...
Mag knife!
Not the mag knife.
Oh.
I found...
Yeah?
the original...
Play.
Pet rock.
Oh, the original. So this is like an old 70s pet rock that people have kept, or is it reinventing the pet rock in a new packaging?
So basically the original guy who invented the pet rock in I think the 70s?
Yep, 70. I was there, so.
He basically, this other company was like, it's 2022, the world's half on fire, why not add more pet rocks? And apparently the original creator was like, yeah, you have my blessing, go and send rocks everywhere.
Like he didn't demand royalties.
He probably did, but I'm sorry. The first time that the pet rock craze happened was, how did that become a thing? How?
This is in the 70s. We didn't have cell phones,
Okay.
personal computers,
Imagination.
downloads. Son, having someone pay for a rock in a box in hay is it's pretty imaginative.
That's not imaginative. That's extortionate.
It's absurd. Yes. Stupid. Yes. Did everybody buy it because they said this is so stupid I have to get it? Yes. Does that mean people in the 70s were stupid? Yes. As stupid as the people of your age?
No. Every era, every generation is stupid in their own unique way.
Yes. Well, let me give you an example of that. I'm glad you brought that up.
Okay.
I really am. I told you guys that today was going to be a unique podcast. It may not work, but I'm experimenting with different ways to communicate to you guys because, as I said to you a long time ago, I don't want to just come on here and say, hey, let's talk about Christian stuff, and all the Christians say, yeah, aren't we great? Because, we try to be great, but we fail. But what do I need to create a podcast where people think like me come in and listen to me say things that they already believe, and then they go, me too. I don't want to be a conservative group that tells how great conservatives are and how the left is destroying the country. The left is destroying the country. But that doesn't mean that just because I come on and tell you that, which you already know it, I've accomplished anything. I want to see if you can leave this podcast entertained, inspired, but also charged with some marching orders to try to change some things. To try to change yourself first. Because if you get the mote out of your eye first, if you get your house in order first, you actually can change the world. So I wanted to try a thematic scene, podcast today. And so that's why I'm not talking to you guys. It's why I'm not, and not because I don't want to, because I love you guys. I'm grateful for you. But that's what I thought. I said, gratefulness is so missing in America. And I thought to myself, what if I decided to devote just one podcast to gratefulness? And if it seemed to make sense, then I would do it once a month, just to remind us what it means and why it's important to be grateful for the things you have, especially if you have freedom and safety from evil, if you have some sense of it. And of course, you don't have perfect safety. People can break in your house and shoot you anytime. I get threats, I get things like that, especially for what I stand for. So, anything can happen. God's in control. But I'm grateful that I live in a country that gives me the freedom to speak freely. And so it made me think about something when it came to faith. I was listening to this I think it was on the news or something, but it was talking about Afghanistan, okay? And there were Christians in Afghanistan. Most fled once the absolute catastrophe of the pullout happened. Many of them left because they knew they were dead, because they were going to be controlled by a theocracy, a hardcore Sharia law, and they would be destroyed, because that's what happens when a country is ruled by Sharia law. If you're not a Muslim, you're going to pay. But there was a handful of Christians that said, we're going to stay, because if we don't, who's going to give them the gospel? Now, that sounds like exactly what you're supposed to say. Right? Well, yeah, but somebody's got to stick here and say the gospel. It sounds great in a book. It sounds great in a radio program, in an interview. It sounds great in a news segment that you're listening to and watching. It sounds great as you think about that in a safe place as a Christian still. But these guys aren't safe. And they very well, some of them will die, real dead, children dead, daughters dead, wives dead, husbands dead, brothers dead, sons dead, really being butchered because they believe that what they believe about Jesus is so important that they want to give it to people who hate their belief. And it made me understand these guys are grateful for their redemption. They're grateful that they believe in a God that has said to them, serve me, tell my story. It might cost you on this earth. Don't worry about it. You're going to be dead a lot longer than you're alive. But when you reach that place of dead, which we oftentimes, even as Christians, think of as the end of life, is in fact the beginning of eternity. Because here's what's interesting, and of course, as you guys know, based on the last few weeks, atheists are desperate to find some reason to live, to some hope, some sense of themselves, of having some value, because they've chosen a belief system that is the most absurd, irrational belief system in the history of humans. They've chosen a belief system that teaches them if what they believe is true, life is meaningless. It is nihilism. It's not something that I'm projecting on you. It's not something I'm saying to you because I have an agenda. I believe in truth and logic and inductive and deductive reasoning. I believe in philosophy and all the ideas that give us the wisdom of the ages to assess what is true and then give it back to you. So, nihilism is, as we've said, what Nietzsche realized, what Bertrand Russell realized, that even, Hitchens realized, even Richard Dawkins. They've all acknowledged it because at least they're honest atheists. If we're right, life has no meaning. We weren't created. There is no purpose. We're just molecules in motion. Even our brains aren't actually thinking. They're just programmed by this molecular structure and the sort of synapses that happen and take place in the chemical reactions, electrical impulses of our brain to give the illusion that we're thinking and being autonomous and having free will so we can function and try to survive. Again, just to survive. But they don't. They die. Everybody dies. Nobody's survived. This neo-Darwinistic motivation that says that survival is what drives people onward hasn't worked. And however long humans have existed, we keep dying, and nobody really lives that long, and nothing's changed in thousands and thousands of years. Even if you live to be, from the Bible, 900 years old, which is crazy old, right? The oldest guy in the world. He died, and he's been dead since then. He's been dead long more than he was alive. 900 years is nothing, numerically uncountable, if you've entered into eternity where there's no edges. So, I feel sorry for atheists because they've chosen the single worst choice you can make. Life has no meaning, and then I die. Life has no meaning, so if somebody butchers a child, they will never be judged for it. And if they do get judged for it on this earth, don't matter, because when they die, they go into eternal unconsciousness. They'll never be punished. There'll be no eternal justice, and they got away with it. If you're somebody that has done evil to people for years and years and years and years and years, you die and go into nothingness, just like the person that sacrificed and was kind to people for years and years and years and years and years. But you all go to the same place. Eternal darkness, no reason, no purpose. No wonder they're miserable. No wonder they come on and attack people of faith. They're jealous. You found something they long for, and they have access to it, and they choose to disregard it. But then they get angry at us because we found peace, hope. I'm grateful for that. So the first thing I'm grateful for, I'll start, is I'm grateful for God. The God that actually revealed himself so that you can know him, find peace, find purpose, find hope. A God that actually says there is, in fact, ultimate justice on this earth, and if not, always eternal justice. I'm grateful for God that literally was the one unique monotheistic God in history because he was a trinity. There's nothing like this. I'm three, but I'm one. I'm all together, but I'm not. It's impossible to grasp fully and completely. We try to use metaphors and ideas to try to wrap our minds around it, but we can't because it's crazy. I'm three, but I'm one. I'm separate, but I'm equal. Difficult to grasp. But because of that, the one element of God, the Son, became a human, allowed him to become one of us, experience the things we did while God remained in the heavens. Jesus said, hey, Father, up there, hey, I relinquish myself of my equality with you so I can feel and experience what the people we made did, so that when they say, hey, you don't know what it's like to try to not sin and to do things, he can say, well, no, I do. I did it. And then he died. This, to me, I told you this a month or two ago when it finally hit me how ridiculously crazy this is. God died. God died. And by the way, the only way God could die and not sort of have the entire universe implode, since he's the only one that would keep things running smoothly, is if he still existed even at death. And in the Trinity, of course, it's possible. So this is why I'm grateful that God actually exists, actually revealed himself, actually showed us that we can find him, actually showed us how to get there, actually showed us how we can spend eternity with him. And no matter what hell you experience on this earth, God wins every time. And if you believe in him, you join him. I'm grateful for that. You know who else I'm grateful for? I'm grateful for my mom. I'm going to say that. My mom comes on this podcast now and again, and you guys don't know who she is. I never announced her. I don't want to embarrass her or even put her in some odd place. I want her just to be able to jump in with you guys and see and talk and experience. But my mom, my parents were divorced. She went back to school. She got a job. She tried to take care of us and my brothers and the best she could because she was responsible for us. She's always prayed for me. She's always stood fast for what I do and has always supported me. We've had our problems and our differences, clearly, but we've worked through them, and we've tried to be respectful and grateful for each other and honorable to each other. And by the way, as a son, I am beholden to honor her because it's in the Ten Commandments. I'm really told you have to do this. God said it, okay? But I was blessed with a mom that loves me and cares about me and watches over and prays for me. And so I just want her to know, grateful for you, Mom. Love you. Thank you for being an example that Jesus is in fact God and that you've tried to live that the best you could, stumbling along the way, but who hasn't? Lastly, today, and I'm grateful for lots of people, lots of things. And I wanted to give that you a chance. And by the way, I want you to go spend the week thinking of 3 people you're grateful for, and I want you to tell them. I want you to tell them, I'm grateful for, not I love you, not I appreciate you. I want you to say, I'm grateful for you, and I'm going to tell you why. Some people don't know the impact they have and how they help others. So I want you to do that. Find 3 folks that you're grateful for. The third person I want to say I'm grateful for, and there's lots more, but I'm just choosing 3, is Wyatt. Wyatt is my son. Wyatt is 26 years old. He's an amazing drummer. He went to school to try to learn computer programming. He was going to do computer games design, and that got a little difficult because it had some elements that he realized wasn't quite what he was good at. So he switched over to computer programming. But he came in and spent a year running this podcast and trying to figure stuff out that he didn't know what to do, but he tried to do it on the fly with all that pressure. He volunteered, never asked for a dime, wouldn't have. That's how he is. He's just got an amazing spirit about him. Kind, funny, fun, nice, loving, funny, great. He's a great, I never in my wildest dreams could have known what a great sidekick he would be, and that my son and I would be able to do this together, and that God would honor me with a son that we could have so much fun together doing this. And I joke with him every single week about how horrible he is at running things when things go wrong, when the audio glitches, when the video doesn't work, when my speech doesn't match up to what I'm saying. I always joke and make fun and put him down. I've actually had people say, oh, you're too hard on your son. My son can take it. My son is courageous. My son is mature. My son, I've joked with my whole life, and he jokes with me. It's us showing we trust each other, we love each other, and we are so mature about that and so safe in that relationship that we can, in fact, joke about each other and not take it personally. Because what we're really saying is, I love you, son. You let me do this, and I let you do it to me. I love it when he sings me back. I love it when he shuts me up and says something, and I'm like, oh, I didn't see that coming, and I laugh, or it gets me. I'm so grateful that God gave him that gift, and I've been able to give him a little bit of money. It's not much, but it's almost a car payment for a month to help him as he's trying to move into his life and figure out what God has for him. But in the meantime, he's here, and hopefully, if this works as I maybe hope it will, but it's up to God. Seriously, I don't really hope for it. I just want it to be if it's supposed to be. But he'll be able to grow with this and be part of this as it turns into something bigger than any of us had imagined. Most of you that are watching this, I told you from the get-go, if this works, you built it. I'm the guy, I'm the comedian, I've got the things I want to say, the things I believe God called me to say and say to do in America. as a Christian, as a conservative, as a patriot, as someone who believes in religious liberties and free speech. That's why I'm here. That's what this is about. If you believe in this, you're helping this exist so we can get it out into the marketplace. And even around the world, a bunch of us who started to get together on my laptop are now watching Australia show up, and Ireland show up, and Scotland show up, and Canada show up, and even exotic places like Des Moines. So that's what this show is about. And so I thought to myself about these Afghanistan Christians who were willing to die. They literally said, somebody's got to stay and tell them that God's real. And it made me wonder, that's their call, and we appreciate it, and we, as Christians, we honor that, and we respect it. And I say to you, well, doesn't that expose what is expected of Christians in America? When we don't say, hey, this isn't of God when you do that. Hey, doing that thing is ungodly, and it's and we have a constitution given to us by men, but the rights were given to us by God. And so I believe that if you live in a country that you're born in, that's the territory God gave you, so you should be grateful for it, and you should be the best citizen you can be in the territory you were given. We were given a country built by Christians who came off the Mayflower onto this ground and said, this will be dedicated to Christ. And from that lineage came the founding fathers, eventually, who all to a man said that the Bible will be honored. It's where morals come from. They weren't all Trinitarians. They didn't all believe in the Trinity. But they all believed that Judeo-Christian ethic was the only way this country will work, and it's the only way the West would work. They were right. They were historians. They cared about the truth, not about the rewriting of American history from those who didn't create it. Atheism didn't create this country. It couldn't have. Atheism ruins everything because it's the antithesis of life. It's death. It's death. It says life has no meaning. There's nothing for us to worry about. We shouldn't do science if they were consistent, because science just allows us to live a bit longer until we die into a nothingness. It didn't really matter. It was futile. Why do poetry? Why do music? None of these things can come from evolution. They make no sense, and they have nothing to do with us being alive and thriving. Nothing. But we do it because we know as Christians that God gave us the Spirit. We're made in His image, and that we can celebrate it and celebrate life and be grateful for life. And ways we can do that is with the beauty of the spoken word and with the melodies, the beauty of ideas and thoughts and dominion, creating things from nothing. Science says the handiwork of God is here. Come find out who created this. Come find the greatest scientist that's ever existed. Show his handiwork. Let's figure it out. Be grateful for that. That's what Christianity gives them. I offer that to the atheists. They say, I don't want that. I don't want that guy. I don't need that guy. I believe we came from rocks. Leave me alone. I'm a scientist. You believe in this crazy man in the sky that nobody sees. I don't. I believe in science and rationality and logic. Clearly, we came from rocks and mud and water. That's how we're here. And it was an accident. And nobody made it happen. It just happens magically. Magically, if you just put a bunch of chemicals into a place and give it billions and trillions of years, people show up. That's what they believe. And they consider it science, not faith, not crazy, not lunacy, not the literal most anti-scientific idea in history, that the greatest minds in history came about by accident through processes of mutations in molecules that had no construct or design at all. Just shows up. And then they get to look back and say, look what we have evolved to be able to assess the world and realize that life has no meaning. So even this brain we evolved to doesn't do us any good. Has no purpose. Nobody cares. Nobody gives a crap. We're here. That's what they've chosen. Could have chosen God. Could have chosen meaning. Could have chosen teleology. Logic and reason and science shows us that that probably makes more sense than coming from rocks and mud. They've chosen the wrong thing. That's why they're not grateful. That's why they come on and insult people. They get pleasure out of hurting people's sacred ideas. Why? That's all they get. They got nothing else. I feel sorry for them. So that's why I let them come on. As long as they have a question, as long as they want to talk, as long as they want to explore, you don't have to agree with me. It makes more interesting stories. If you don't agree with me, I'm fine with it. But You don't get to come on and just insult me. I'm not going to keep you on. Why would I let you come on just insult me and my friends that come on here? Why would I let you go on and just lambast and do things that are just simply, dark and broken and just malicious? You're not giving any joy or help or healing to the world. You're just continuing the cancer. Well, you're going to get to do your cancer somewhere else. There's plenty of atheist websites where you can mock and ridicule people that don't think like you. You can go live in that world, in that cesspool. But the rest of us are trying to become godlike, to let God change the world, heal things, make us better, make us even love our enemies. You don't have that obligation, atheist. You don't have that obligation. You don't have to love me. You get to shoot me if you want to. Look at Stalin. Look at Mao. Look at Pol Pot. Look at Kim Jong-un. All of these ideas are justified under the foundation of atheism. I can kill anybody I want because I rule the world, because there's no purpose. I have no transcendent being by which I have to bow the knee. I'm the king. That's what atheism is to be. I've said this before. It's one thing to even prove your point compared and juxtaposed to another point of view that's an antithetical, finding which one seems to make sense, work best, more robust, move us towards healing and health. Another thing is, does it work? What happens when people like the United States of America believe that there's a God in heaven that we have to bow to, who gave us our rights so they can't be taken, that we have a moral compass and that we have to love people, including our enemies, and pray for those that despitefully use us? It's an absurd thing to say, unless there's a supernatural world that God has given us that we're supposed to implement into this world so that we can find out that there really is some greater good that we can achieve. That's one way to create a country, and we got the freest, greatest nation in human history. Or look at the foundations of Soviet Russia and all of the ideas that didn't find God necessary, but in fact jettisoned him so the state could become God, take its place. And the state is always made up of the self-elected who believe they're smarter, better, and more important than the rest of us, so that they can rule us. And the whole time they're going to say what we really want is equality for everybody except us. We get more because we're the ones that get to dictate who gets to be equal. The absurdity, the lack of logic, the inability for these people to find a cohesiveness to land on is why they're so miserable. Why else would they be so evil to people and laugh and mock and emoji and think they've done something clever? It's literally an ideology of children. It's embarrassing. I feel sorry for them. But if you're still alive and you're still watching this, you might be thinking of the things I've said and saying, it is kind of an odd thing. Maybe we shouldn't act that way. That's just God speaking to you, saying, you can come, you can change, you can say, come find me, come find me. I'll give you some things you don't have. Maybe you were burned by the church. Maybe Christians were jerks to you. Maybe you saw religious people as doing evil things. Well, that's proof that Christianity is real, because Christianity guaranteed that people would do evil things, because we believe that people are inherently evil. That's what the Judeo-Christian ethic is. No other religion teaches that, right? Every other philosophy is we're really good people, but we make a mistake now and again. And if you believe that, then you're not going to blame a murderer. You're going to blame a gun. You're not going to blame the undisciplined. You're going to blame the Big Mac. You're not going to blame the person that doesn't choose to humble themselves. You're going to blame the people that have asked you to study so you could actually complete the exam like everybody else. You're never going to blame the people if you think the people are good. You're always going to blame something else. It's false and it's untrue, and it's why they can't fix anything. It's why the left destroys everything, because it lives in a lie. It lives in a lie. I'm grateful I know the truth. But I'm no better than you, so I'm given it to you. Atheism has nothing to give anybody, unless you want to live as a narcissist. If you want to watch institutionalized narcissism, watch atheism and cultural Marxism control things, because that's what it is. It's pure narcissism, institutionalized systemically into CRT, critical law theory, critical race theory, postmodernism, everything that's destroying America, because it's a religion. And it is a religion. They worship it. Gives them a sense of ethics, even though it's unethical. Gives them a sense of tolerance, even though they're intolerant. Gives them a sense of open-mindedness, even though they're bigots. Gives them a sense of kindness, even though they're hateful. Gives them a sense of purpose, even though it's all anarchy. These are the people that live in such blindness that they watch people burn down buildings and call it a peaceful protest, and do that with a straight face. They believe it's true. They believe it's true. They live in a fantasy. And if you live in a fantasy, it's so ironic, folks. Whenever a leftist disparages you, there's something, and I think I've taught you this before, whatever they call you, one thing you can know for sure is that's who they are. If they call you a bigot, it's because they're bigoted. If they call you intolerant, it's because you're intolerant. If they call you fascist, it's because they're fascist. That's how they survive. It's parasitical. They have to find something actually healthy, drain its value so they can live long enough to find another host to attach to. It's sick, but they can change. See, there's only two reasons why you'd be a leftist. Only two. One is because you're uneducated. You actually like people, care about people, you want people to have equality, you don't think it's fair that some people don't have as much as others, and you want to fix that, so you think that's the way to do it. You're just uneducated. You just chose the wrong means by which you could fix these things. That's all. That's all you did. That's okay. I would prefer the uneducated, because guess what? An uneducated person can get educated. They can just learn, weigh the two ideas and realize, I guess I picked the wrong, but that's okay. I'm going to go here now. Remember this. You need to know this if you're a leftist. I'm a conservative. Conservatives, when what we believe is in conflict with what is actually true, and we find out what is true by looking at the history and the wisdom of the ages to find out what really works. When the conservative, what he believes is in conflict with what is true, we change our beliefs. When a leftist, with what he believes is in conflict with what is true, he changes the truth. Keep in mind, we're in postmodern. That's a leftist idea. There is no truth. It's all relative. That's a leftist idea. They now say, it continues to go on, that men are actually women, women are actually men, and there's no such thing as men and women. That's a leftist idea. There can't be logic in your world because you don't believe there's anything true, so there's nowhere to land. You're the people that actually keep people from speaking in colleges. Conservatives are kicked out all the time. Conservatives are pushed off the internet. You run the tech companies and you don't let us speak because you are bigots, because you're frightened by ideas that expose your flaws. That's on you, man. I can't fix you because I've exposed what is true. It is empirically verifiable that only conservatives are disinvited from colleges, never the leftists, and you're the ones doing it. You are the bigot. You are the fascist. You are the Nazi. I'm not making this up. It is empirically verifiable. And you chose it. See, if you're uneducated, you can fix that. Just get educated and change and join us. But if you've seen the education, weighed the two, realized you were wrong, but continue where you want because it makes you feel good, it gives you power, and it allows you not to have to adjust or change, then you are evil. If you live in lies, expose lies, speak lies, continue to demand people live by lies, control people, destroy their lives, if you do those things because it makes you feel good about yourself, you are an evil, despicable human. You need to get some serious psychological help. Something's wrong. Starts in your heart, though. You know Jesus, you'll get fixed. It starts right there. You change your spirit, and that begins to permeate out and heal your flesh. So I'm grateful that the truth of how you can get better is here. All right. I wanted to go to something else. I didn't really know I was going to go where I just went, but I did. So I decided I would tell you a story. I've never told a story that I can tell. Why have I ever told a story on the podcast before?
You've told a few stories.
I have?
A few dozen.
Hundreds? A dozen?
Hundozens, yep.
Okay.
So I think that's like, what, 1,200?
I think so.
Yeah.
I've told 1,200. Okay, well, okay. So here we sit with me telling a dozen stories. So I wanted to tell a story that happened to me because I told you guys I wanted to have gratefulness, a day of gratefulness. So I told you I was grateful for my son, who I love very much. Wyatt.
Yep.
I love you.
Love you too.
Okay. It's my son. Love you, God? He never answered.
I love you too.
Okay, you don't get to be. And if you're going to play God, at least don't have such a dorky voice.
Oh, wait, listen. Can you tell me, with complete confidence, that is not how he sounds like?
No, God can do whatever he wants.
Exactly.
For all I know, he inhabited your body for that split second, and that was his actual voice. And if it is, I'm surprised he landed on that. Yep. Anyways, but I did want to tell you guys a story of gratefulness. That's a personal story, and I'm going to tell it to you right now. So again, this is a unique podcast. I haven't engaged with you guys this time. I'll do it next week. But I just wanted to try something else. I wanted to see if I could find kind of the origins of the Brad Stine Has Issues, which was me just kind of extemporaneously speaking, letting sort of God speak through me, see what might come out. I never know why. I never know what's coming out of my mouth. Have you picked up on that?
You, me, and this whole audience.
Okay. So again, I am simply being true to the experience that we're all having, and the only person that doesn't get to experience this is me, because I'm the one doing it. Does that count?
Honestly, you lost me.
Okay.
I'm the button pusher, man. Tell me to push a button, I'll do that.
And the voice of God.
Yeah, allegedly.
All right. I'm going to tell you a story of something that happened to me. I don't even know if I've ever told you this story, White. I might have.
I mean, you're bringing out a book which you've never done for a story.
Yes. I'm not going to read the book because the story would be too long if I actually read it from here.
So the story is from the book.
Yeah, story's in the book.
You had a story in the book.
Yes.
That you're reading.
Yes.
For the story.
Yes.
But you're the one who had the story.
It's my story.
In the book.
If I hadn't told him the story, he wouldn't have put it in there. It's my
So why do you need the book if you already have the story in your head?
Well, I'll tell you what. I wanted to show people the story is actually, you know what? I'm going to read it. It's only 4 pages. Okay, I'm going to do something.
Wait. I'm sorry. And this was the long version?
No.
You said it was too long for you to...
Well, I didn't realize it was only 4 pages, so I think
You wrote the story!
I didn't write it. I told the guy the story, and then he wrote. Okay, so here's what it is, guys. I'm going to leave you with this. If you don't know Eric Metaxas, that's what he looks like.
Eric Metaxas? He sounds like a tax collector.
No, he's
like
Eric
a cartoonist one.
Wyatt, you met him in New York. You know your favorite place to drive?
Listen, we don't talk about New York and driving.
He hates New York. He hates Manhattan.
I'm just saying his last name is literally Metaxas.
Metaxas. I know. Remember, well, that's because he's Greek. Do you remember when we went and we got on the subway and then we tried to find his office building and we were walking in the rain and then we finally found it and we went up there and then I did his show. Do you remember that?
I remember us going to the wrong building, spending 20 minutes figuring out why we couldn't get up there and then realizing it was across the block. I remember that part.
That's the story.
Oh, spoiler alert, audience, I'm sorry.
Well, that's the story of the guy that wrote the story that I'm about to say that's not the story.
But that's not the story in the book that we're reading from the guy who wrote
the book.
Yeah, okay.
It's called Miracles from Eric Metaxas, who also wrote Bonhoeffer, New York Times best-selling author. It says Miracles, what they are, why they happen, and how they can change your life. This is a story of a compilation of miracles that Eric Metaxas, who many of you might know, compiled from people he knew, friends. So he knew they were legit, they weren't weirdos, freaks, or whatever, and he wanted to tell stories of people's personal experience with God that were unique, so unique that and they have to be called miraculous, and they were in fact personally delivered to him, and he made a book about it. Well, he contacted me, and he asked me, do you have a miracle story? I said, you know what? I actually do. I have a story that happened to me as a miracle, and I wrote it to him, and he loved it, and he put it in the book. Well, guess what? I'm going to end today's podcast. See, he even subscribed it to me. This was back in 14. To Brad, thank you for letting me put your amazing story in this book. The Lord will use it to touch lives. God bless you, Eric. Metaxas. Thanks, buddy. Well, anyways, I'm going to read my story out of this book, and I would recommend you get it if you've ever sort of wondered where God is, or why he's hard to find, or what it means to wonder if there could in fact be miracles. This is my story. Now again, I'm going to read it. It's 1, 2, 3, 4 pages. So hang on. But again, this is unique. This is the Grateful episode, so we're doing something different. And it goes like this. It's called The Power of God. My friend Brad Stine is a professional comedian. In a profile on him in The New Yorker, he was described as having a comic style that is frantic, aggressive, and caustic, with echoes of Robin Williams, Sam Kinison, and George Carlin, who is his comedy hero. Brad grew up as a Christian, but like so many Christians, he never understood why God didn't seem to behave the same way today that he behaved during the times that the Bible was written. He believed the events of the Bible, such as the parting of the Red Sea and the miracles of the loaves and fishes and the healing Jesus did, and Jesus rising from the dead and everything else. But why weren't these things happening in his lifetime? Where could he witness them? Where was the God who had done those things and whom he knew existed? Brad had often heard people refer to things as miracles, such as when someone survived what might have been a deadly car crash, but he wondered, how could we know those things weren't just coincidences? What made something a miracle? Brad remembered the amazing stories from the book of Acts, such as when the Apostle Paul and his companion Silas are freed from their chains by angels, while the guards nearby are sleeping. Now, that was a miracle. It couldn't just happen. If it happened, there was no doubt it wasn't a coincidence. But Brad wondered if all of Paul and Silas's friends believed them when they told that story and other amazing stories. Perhaps some of their friends would have been just as skeptical as we would if we heard amazing stories like that from our own friends. Part of the reason Brad wondered how some of the people in the Bible were viewed by people around them when they told of miraculous happenings is because something happened to him that no one else could ever corroborate. It is his word against the world's, so to speak. Why would someone, or should they, believe his story? And yet, he knows it's true. By way of background, Brad grew up in the 1970s in a church that was very theologically conservative. Brad thoroughly adhered to their teachings and could himself be quite legalistic and rigid. His own beliefs in his church environment were not at all conducive to people sharing about supernatural miracle stories. But there were many other churches blooming in California in the 70s where such things were more accepted. When Brad was in his early 20s, he first experienced something of these other churches through the ministry of John Wimber. Wimber had been a musical arranger for the Righteous Brothers, but by the time Brad encountered him, he was the leader of the incredibly fast-growing Vineyard church movement, which was known for its openness to the miraculous. Brad liked what he saw there and slowly drifted in that direction, eventually attending a charismatic church every Sunday. Brad took the zeal and intensity he carried with him everywhere, right into this church. So he would arrive at the services 45 minutes early every Sunday to pray for the service, asking God to move powerfully through the pastor and in the congregation. One Sunday, his pastor spoke to the congregation before the service started about their own role during the service. He made it clear that they were themselves the church, and they should feel as free to minister as he did. It wasn't supposed to be a one-man show. They were part of what God was doing every Sunday, so they must feel free to act upon anything they felt was God nudging them to do something or say something. He made it clear that this was a church where people should never be afraid of stepping out in faith and doing something like openly praying for someone if they thought that's what God wanted them to do. Even if they got it wrong, it was better that they should try than that they should just sit there for fear of making a mistake. He said that unless they were all willing to take some chances and make some mistakes, they would never learn anything. And it was his desire as their pastor to teach them to do what he did, and more important, to do what God wanted them to do. They must learn to hear from God and to be able to tell the difference between when God was really speaking to them and when it was just something that was in their own heads. It was an easy mistake to make, so they must be willing to step out in faith and learn. God would be with them in the process, and he wanted to reassure them that in this church they should feel free to make mistakes. If their hearts were in the right place, that was all that mattered, because as the Bible says, God looks on the heart. He said that after each service, if we believe what you said or did was not from God, we will evaluate what happened, and we'll try to help guide you. But he made it clear that God would rather you have the faith to act on his direction, even if you're wrong, than to not practice hearing from the Lord and stepping out in faith. So, everyone took their seats for the service, ready to act. Brad remembered that the congregation was rather small that day, and things began with what they called a special song. Oh, do I remember. To Brad's horror, it was an elderly woman playing What a Friend We Have in Jesus. on the harmonica. Brad remembered feeling that it was tremendously cheesy and awkward, but he knew that her heart was in the right place, and he tried to focus on that. We should dilate for a moment to say that during this time in his life, Brad was a professional magician, making his living performing sleight-of-hand tricks at tables and restaurants throughout Orange County. He also had a very good friend who was a professional hypnotist. So Brad knew quite a bit about hypnosis and deceiving people through trickery. He generally thought of himself as someone who was especially adept at understanding our ability to deceive others, or be deceived ourselves. So he felt himself part of that fraternity of magicians, going back to Houdini, who delighted in exposing fake psychics and other kinds of charlatans. He and his friend had even once attended a spiritualist church simply to expose the tricks that happened there. So he wasn't one to be fooled by what many Christians call being slain in the spirit, when it was really just a kind of mass hysteria. He was adamant that if he ever would be slain in the spirit, it would have to be God himself doing the slaying. Then he has a footnote. This is a term some churches use to describe the phenomenon of someone being overwhelmed by a feeling that God has touched them. They typically lose their power to stand up and fall onto the floor of the sanctuary, sometimes for a few seconds, and sometimes for quite a long time. If you grew up in a charismatic church, you know what it means to be slain in the spirit. He wasn't about to go along with it just because that's what others expected. Either God was going to knock him down or he wasn't budging. He had seen much of what seemed like groupthink in some of the kookier charismatic churches, and he vowed that he would never be taken in by anything like that. True. Brad was in the second row of the service that Sunday, listening to the woman's awful harmonica interpretation of that wonderful old hymn, when his pastor, the one who had just told everyone that they had a key role in the service, sat down right in front of him. Sure enough, no sooner had the pastor sat down than Brad felt a strong sensation that he should put his hands on the pastor's shoulders and pray. Brad felt that however strong this sensation was, and it was strong, it didn't make much sense, because just before the pastor had spoken a few minutes ago, a whole group of people, Brad included, had laid hands on the pastor and prayed for him and the service. We already did it. Furthermore, they were now in the middle of the service itself, so it would be awkward to do such a thing. It simply didn't seem the right time. But just as he was thinking this, he recalled the words the pastor had just spoken about learning to trust God. He had said that God wants to teach us to hear his voice and to do things that seemingly make no sense. Part of what God is doing, too, is trying to get us to respond, especially if what he is saying makes little sense. So we will learn to tell the difference between his voice and our own thoughts. So Brad worked up the nerve to do what he thought God was telling him to do. He laid his hand on the pastor's shoulder and began to pray. Just as he did this, closing his eyes and bowing his head, he saw the pastor glance back at him. Brad thought the pastor was probably just thinking Brad was trying to get his attention, but then realized Brad was going into prayer mode. But Brad remembered that it made him feel even more self-conscious about what he was doing, because not only had the pastor turned around, but many of those in the congregation could see Brad doing what he was doing and were probably themselves wondering what was going on. Brad thought that the pastor himself was probably thinking, oh, brother, look at Stine getting all hyper-spiritual on me to show his incredible holiness to be in the whole congregation. In telling this story, Brad emphasizes that he didn't want to pray for the pastor. I didn't. That he felt he was making a spectacle of himself. I did. And it was extremely uncomfortable in doing what he did, but he felt he had to be obedient to what he thought God was telling him to do, especially after what the pastor had just said. But Brad had never done anything like this before, and he wanted it to be over as soon as possible. He expected nothing to come from it. He just knew one thing, that he had had a powerful sense he could put his hand on his pastor and pray for him. So out of sheer obedience, he did it. But a moment after, he stepped out in faith and did it. With his thoughts in this blur of contradictions and self-consciousness, something really did happen. By further way of background, Brad explains that he had many times over the years begged God in anguish prayer to reveal himself in some palpable way. He prayed God would give him a vision or any kind of manifestation that would make him real in a way Brad had never experienced. That had never happened. But now, not praying for anything like that at all, he suddenly began to feel what he very distinctly describes as a warm sphere emanating from the center of his stomach. Brad says that he used the word sphere specifically and deliberately because it wasn't a vague, gooey feeling. No, he said this was an actual sphere, right? A ball, an orb that I could tangibly feel. He describes it as warm, round, and pulsating. Then, while this was happening, he became aware of his prayer for the pastor taking on a life of its own. I was speaking, he says, but it seemed out of my control, like an out-of-body experience where I was doing it and being aware it was occurring without my volition. Suddenly, the orb began to expand and pulsate while growing throughout my entire body. I literally felt like I couldn't stop it or control it, and I sensed lightning bolts or shafts of light emanating from my body. Brad says that it was as though light was bursting out of my being, like the grand climax when the Nazis gets exploded by God in the Indiana Jones and the Ark of the Covenant scene. Brad says that the whole thing was tremendously startling, to say the least, because it was sudden and he never saw any of it coming. He is emphatic and say that it was not a sweet, soft experience. It was so overwhelming that he says the only word that he can be used to describe it accurately is fear. A sheer sense of fear came over him, he says, because I began to feel as though something was controlling me, he says. And I felt that if it didn't stop, I was going to literally be obliterated, to explode. I even had to find my thoughts in the midst of this and pray, God, help me. At this point, I felt a voice inside me remind me that fear was never from God, and that I was safe and could experience this as long as I chose, and that I had the power to stop when I chose. And that is exactly what I did. I reached a point where I felt spent. Brad says as this continued, he grew increasingly self-conscious and uncomfortable because of what the rest of the congregation would make of what was happening. He could only imagine what all of them were witnessing from their own point of view. It was so utterly mind-blowing and outrageous that he knew it must have been frightening and awesome to them as well. And so, he said, as quickly and unexpectedly as it had started, I stopped. I slowly raised my head, opened my eyes, and prepared to try to explain to everyone what I just went through and to tell them to not be afraid. But when I looked around, still being serenaded by the end of the horrible harmonica solo, I realized something even more amazing. No one, and I mean no one, had the slightest idea anything had taken place. No one was staring. No one was in awe. No one had even moved from his or her original place. This itself was almost as amazing to Brad as what had just happened. The idea that the God of the universe had just reached down in a display of frightening and awesome power and majesty and had palpably and physically touched one of his children in this overwhelming way in the midst of a crowd, and none of them knew it but Brad himself. After he opened his eyes, he wasn't sure what to do. He was actually flushed from the experience, and he heaved a huge sigh, but he really wanted desperately to scream out to everyone who was there about what had just happened. It was so huge and so overwhelming, beyond anything he had ever hoped God might do in all those prayers he had prayed over the years. God Almighty, the creator of the universe, just now had come down and revealed himself in such power. But Brad didn't say anything. He just stayed there in his seat in complete awe, thinking about what had just happened. The service continued as though nothing had just happened. And that was that. But throughout the service, Brad couldn't think of anything else. The moment the service was over, he buttonholed his pastor and tried to describe what had taken place, assuming that if anyone would appreciate it and understand it, the pastor could. But he just kind of smiled, Brad says. And he told me, oh, that was nice, and went on his merry way. And that's when I realized that for the rest of my life, I will have experienced something without explanation that had never happened to me before and will likely never happen again. He reiterates that what happened to him was just like what happened to a number of the characters in the Bible who experienced something all alone, just between them and God. People could believe them or not believe them, but there was nothing they could do but try and explain it and know that they were the only ones who had experienced it. More than 25 years later, Brad still puzzles over what happened that morning. It was the most extraordinary physical and spiritual experience of his life. But sometimes, even he almost wonders if it really even happened. He knows it did, but it's hard not to wonder about what it was and what it meant. Why would God choose me, he asks, to do this unique event on that date without warning? And Brad wondered why God would then disappear back to that familiar but frustrating place where we cannot see or feel him, though we know he is there. If Brad ever doubted God was there, though, he didn't anymore. It seems that on that one special Sunday, Brad says, God Almighty wanted me to experience just how much he loves me, that he was in fact real, and that one day I will know him as I am known by him. I will see clearly and not through a clouded lens. And all because this skeptical, pessimistic magician did the one thing God asked me to do. Obey. This is God's coming, Brad Stine. Speaking truth, because we're the last truth tellers. Hoping that this is just the beginning of God entering back into America, re-remembering who we were, giving us a third great awakening, changing the entire tapestry of D.C. to be filled with those who will fall on their knees, repent, and bring this nation back to the God that it was dedicated to when the Pilgrims first landed. But you can't do that unless you speak truth and stand for it, no matter what it takes. Just like our Afghanistan brothers. Somebody has to stay and tell the story. This is God's comic, Brad Stine. PC free is liberty. And all I'm doing, all I'm called to do, why God made me for a time such as this, is to put the woke back to sleep. See you next week.